Up next in the broadcast, Korea's Foreign Minister Yun Byung-se presents Seoul's stance on crimes against humanity by North Korea and Japan at the 25th regular session of the UN Human Rights Council. The Defense Ministry calls Pyongyang's recent missile launches a violation of UN Security Council resolutions, and it stresses that commercial aviation is now at risk. A face-to-face talk between Western powers and Russia about the standoff in Ukraine. But what is Moscow's real motive? Primetime News begins now.
Good evening to our viewers in Korea, and hello to those of you who are watching from around the world. It's Wednesday, March 5th here in Seoul. I am Yoo Ji-hye.
And I'm Sean Lim. Thank you so much for joining us. We begin this evening with Seoul's diplomatic efforts to address Japan's wartime sexual slavery issue.
The South Korean Foreign Minister Yun Byung-se raised the unresolved matter of comfort women at the UN Human Rights Council in Geneva earlier today. For more on what he said, we bring in our Hwang Sung-hee into the studio. Now, Sung-hee, what can you tell us?
In a speech at the UN Human Rights Council session today, Minister Yun Byung-se stressed the need to stop the ongoing sexual violence and armed conflicts around the globe. He said there are violations that took place in the past in which the perpetrators have yet to repent, and pointed to the so-called comfort women as living evidence. Minister Yun said, quote, "Without repenting past wrongdoings, a brighter future will not be secured," which is, of course, a message to Japan. An estimated 200,000 women, mostly Korean, were used as sex slaves by the Japanese army in the early 20th century. This is the first time since 2006 that Seoul's top diplomat is attending the UN Human Rights Council session, and the first time ever that the comfort women issue is being raised, which is a sign that Seoul is serious about tackling the issue.
Relations between Korea and Japan are at their lowest in years. Is it getting worse?
Sean, let's put it this way. It's been a year since President Park Geun-hye took office, and she has yet to sit down with her Japanese counterpart for summit talks. Prime Minister Shinzo Abe is notorious for his nationalistic stance and his tendency to glorify Japan's World War II history. The comfort women issue has always been at the center of the diplomatic row. Japan's latest denial of its wartime crimes was made by its vice education minister, who claimed the Japanese military's use of sex slaves is a fabricated story. Now, on top of that, Japan said last week it would review a landmark apology it issued in 1993 to the comfort women, dubbed the Kono Statement, after nationalist politicians in Japan called the women's accounts a total lie.
Going back to Minister Yun's speech in Geneva, did he also mention the dire human rights conditions in North Korea?
He did. Minister Yun talked about the UN's recent investigation into North Korea's human rights abuses, expressing hope that it will lead to practical steps for improving human rights conditions in the reclusive regime. The South Korean diplomat called on all nations to stop the forced repatriations of North Korean refugees who have left their country in search of freedom and to ensure their safety. Minister Yun also talked about war-separated families and wartime abductees, calling it one of the most serious humanitarian tragedies, and urged North Korea to cooperate in solving the issue and begin by holding reunions for such families on a regular basis.
All right, Sung-hee, thanks for wrapping up the foreign minister's statements.
My pleasure.
All right, now moving now to Seoul's push to have regular cross-border family reunions. South Korea has made a proposal to the North, this time in writing, asking for talks over the urgent humanitarian issue.
But as our Kim Ji-yeon reports, many expect Pyongyang to turn the offer down.
Seoul's Unification Ministry sent a written proposal to Pyongyang on Wednesday, suggesting that the two Koreas hold talks on making reunions for families separated by the Korean War a regular event. Deputy spokesperson Park Soo-jin said the ministry proposed holding a round of working-level Red Cross talks next Wednesday on the South Korean side of Panmunjom, which is located on the de facto border between the two Koreas. The offer follows President Park Geun-hye's call for regular family reunions during a speech on March 1st, where she pointed out that tens of thousands of South Koreans remain on a waiting list to see their long-lost loved ones in the north. The last round of reunions 2 weeks ago were the first in more than 3 years. Pyongyang has yet to respond to Seoul's proposal. Local media outlets in Seoul say Pyongyang is likely to reject the offer and instead make a counter-proposal for working-level talks, where other unresolved cross-border issues could be discussed, such as a resumption of tours to the North's Mount Kungang Resort and the lifting of economic sanctions on North Korea. Experts say Pyongyang is likely to respond to Seoul's proposal after joint military exercises between Seoul and Washington end on Thursday. Kim Ji-yeon, Arirang News.
South Korea may be trying to keep inter-Korean relations warm for the sake of family reunions, but it is also keeping close watch over North Korea's recent provocations.
Seoul's defense ministry lashed out at Pyongyang for its rocket launch on Tuesday, a move it said violated UN resolutions. Our defense ministry correspondent Kim Hyun-bin reports.
South Korea's defense ministry said Wednesday that the previous day's rocket launches were a violation of UN Security Council resolutions, as the North did not notify anyone of the event in advance, and the missiles jeopardized a commercial Chinese airliner flying through North Korean airspace.
This is a violation of UN Security Council resolutions, and it has threatened the safety of a commercial airliner. Pyongyang should stop its provocations and abide by international standards.
Defense Ministry spokesperson Kim Min-seok labeled the launches as explicit acts of aggression against a series of ongoing military exercises by South Korea and the U.S., adding that Seoul is keeping a close watch on the possibility of additional provocations to come. The missiles were short-range KN-02 ballistic missiles, and military sources in South Korea said Wednesday the North has around 100 of the missiles in its arsenal. The missiles can load up to 400 kilograms of explosives and chemical weapons, and dozens of missiles can be launched in minutes. The KN-02 has a maximum range of 170 kilometers and can hit a target at that distance in less than 4 minutes, posing a huge threat to the Seoul metropolitan area. It is thought that 30 KN-02 missiles are mounted on mobile launch pads and have Seoul in their crosshairs. North Korea has recently developed a multiple rocket launcher called the KN-09, which is presumed to have a target distance of 200 kilometers. That means that missiles shot from the border could reach Kaesongdae, where the joint military bases of South Korea's Army, Air Force, and Navy headquarters are located. The Pentagon said Tuesday in its latest strategy document that North Korea poses a growing threat to the United States because of its pursuit of long-range missiles and nuclear weapons development. The U.S. Defense Department said the U.S. military will keep up its investment in missile defense while maintaining a major presence in the region. Kim Hyun-bin, Arirang News.
On domestic politics, the chief of opposition Democratic Party Kim Han-gil and An Chol-soo of the new Political Vision Party will serve as co-leaders of their new coalition party. And making the announcement at the National Assembly briefing on Wednesday, a spokesperson said an equal number of lawmakers from each side would serve as the party's leadership, although the size of it has yet to be determined. Kim and An will make a final decision on how the new coalition will be launched as soon as Thursday. The surprise merger between the DP and New Political Vision Party came on March 1st. The Korean government has unveiled its to-do list that aims to help carry out the ambitious 3-year economic innovation plan. Some 60 tasks focus on balancing domestic demand and exports, boosting the R&D sector, and reforming public organizations. Arirang's Hwang Sung-hee has the details.
A total of 59 detailed tasks will back up the Korean government's 3-year economic innovation plan. Finance Minister Hyun Ho-seok said during an economy-related ministers' meeting on Wednesday that they focus on removing excessive red tape in the name of growth and bolstering sluggish corporate investment. To accomplish the latter and boost venture businesses, the government first plans to offer bigger tax breaks for so-called angel investors, those who invest in startups. For example, angel investors would not be taxed for investments of up to 15 million won, or roughly $14,000 starting next year through 2017. The government also plans to provide financial support worth $880 million for 500 small and medium-sized businesses every year starting in 2015. Hyun said that the government is drawing up a package of measures aimed at easing regulations that hamper active participation of private equity funds in the mergers and acquisition market. The government will go through the tasks in an economy-related ministers' meeting that takes place every week. It would also set up a separate task force team to monitor how well the tasks are being achieved. Hwang Sung-hee, Arirang News.
More Koreans who were raised or even born abroad are returning to the homeland to make new lives for themselves. Commonly referred to as kyoppos in Korean, they now account for nearly 15% of all foreigners in the country. Connie Lee reports on how they're immersing themselves in Korea.
Bien-ho Jian, or Pyonhae-yeon as she's known here in Korea, is receiving her scholarship to study in Korea. She's a Korean Chinese who came from China just 7 months ago.
I'll be studying law at Seoul University.
The scholarship given by the Overseas Korea Foundation to dozens of foreign nationals of Korean descent not only gave Bien a chance to come to Korea for the first time in her life, it also gave her better opportunities to study in her field of choice.
I found that there are more advanced and developed courses in the area of law that I wanted to study here in Korea than in China.
And she's not the only one making the move to the motherland. According to recent data from the Ministry of Justice, the number of foreign nationals of Korean ethnicity surpassed the 200,000 mark for the first time last year. That's a 24% increase from the year before.
The record number comes from the increasing number of Korean Chinese citizens coming to Korea. In 2008, immigration laws were amended to give Korean Chinese citizens living here similar benefits to Korean citizens, including being allowed to own property and have health insurance.
In 2013, more than 67% were Korean Chinese. The second and third largest group were the Korean Americans, making up 19%, and the Korean Canadians, who made up nearly 6%. And for the most part, many come to Korea for the jobs.
There's definitely greater interest among overseas Koreans to live in Korea because Korea has become globalized with many new employment opportunities.
And taking advantage of opportunities is what one Korean American is doing. 31-year-old Kenny Park uses American influences and Korean ethnic background to start a Mexican fusion restaurant in Seoul.
Growing up in California, we just have a really vast array of food that's available to us. But when that Korean taco truck trend started to really boom, I kind of woke up one day and was like, hey, why don't we introduce this Korean taco trend in Korea as opposed to doing it in America.
The popular restaurant has grown, expanding to 3 locations in the span of 2 years.
I think Korea is it's such an underrated place to do business and to live as an expat or as a kyopo. And I think the opportunities are really abundant here.
Connie Lee, Arirang News.
Over now to the latest on the Ukraine crisis. A series of diplomatic efforts to quell a further escalation of the standoff is underway.
The leaders from Russia and the West are set to meet on Wednesday, while Russia and the U.S. will talk on the same day as well. Connie Kim reports.
With an aim of easing tensions over the Ukraine crisis, Russia has agreed to meet with NATO on Wednesday in Brussels. It'll be the first public contact between Moscow and the military alliance since Russian forces moved into Ukraine's Crimean Peninsula. Further south in Europe on Wednesday in Paris, U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry and Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov will hold talks for the first time since the unrest in Ukraine erupted. The two will be meeting on the sidelines of a special conference that aims to help Lebanon cope with the influx of Syrian refugees. Before traveling to France, Kerry stopped in Kiev in a show of support for the country's interim government. Afterward, Kerry slammed Russia's deployment of troops to Crimea as an act of aggression, but added that the U.S. is not looking for a confrontation.
In the streets today, I didn't see anybody who feels threatened, except for the potential of an invasion by Russia. So I would hope that President Putin, who is insisting against all evidence everywhere in the world about troops being in Crimea, that they're not there, that he will step back and listen carefully, that we would like to see this de-escalated.
During his short trip to Kyiv, Kerry offered an economic and technical loan package worth $1 billion to help Ukraine's new government. The United States also plans to send technical advisors to Ukraine to get the country's economy back on track. Meanwhile, in Russia, the Defense Ministry confirmed that it had successfully test-fired an intercontinental ballistic missile Tuesday. Although the test was planned before the current crisis in Ukraine and the U.S. was notified beforehand, it adds to the undercurrent of tensions between Russia and the West. Connie Kim, Arirang News.
And for an expert's take on the fast-changing events in Ukraine, we are joined in the studio by Professor Olena Shahel of Department of Ukrainian Studies at Hankuk University for Foreign Studies. Welcome to the program.
Hello, good to be here.
Well, Professor, let's start with the root of the crisis. Why is Russia so keen on tightening its grip over Ukraine? And is this something that Putin had been planning for a while?
Well, if we start talking about the Crimea, we should remember that there is Russia's Black Sea Fleet there, and Putin is not willing to give that up. And Russia does not have a very favorable access to oceans. So the Black Sea Fleet is really important to Russia because it would give it an access to the Mediterranean Sea, the Atlantic Ocean, and the Indian Ocean. And if Putin gets grip and gets control over the Crimea, he would not have to negotiate with Ukraine about Russia's presence at the peninsula anymore. Secondly, we should remember that there are quite large deposits of shale gas near the coast of the Crimea.
Well, indeed, a lot of the countries are unhappy with Putin's move. The U.S. and the West are talking Russia sanctions. Now, do you think they could really be imposed, and will it make any difference?
Well, I think Putin has stopped caring about what the West has to say about him a long time ago. I think that Putin is a man of actions, not just words. And I think if the West takes more action, maybe Putin will be more favorable into re-evaluating his plans about invading into Ukraine.
So if the invasion does happen, will we see a repeat of the Georgia War, the 5-day Georgia War that happened about 5.5 years ago when Russia invaded?
Well, many observers, including Georgia's ex-president Saakashvili, think that Georgian scenario is being repeated in Ukraine right now. But I have to say that there are several differences between Ukraine and Georgia. For example, the support for intervention, domestic support for intervention into Ukraine is much weaker in Russia than it was in the Georgian case, because Ukrainians and Russians are Slavs. They are so-called brethren people, brethren nations, and there are many inter-ethnic marriages, families, which consist of family members who have relatives on both sides of the border. And let us also not forget that Ukraine is much bigger than Georgia, and it has a larger population. So if Putin decides to wage a war onto Ukraine, it will cost him significantly more.
Well, there's a fresh diplomatic efforts ongoing right now as we speak to avert this escalation of the crisis ongoing. Do you see any possibility of a negotiated end to this?
Yes, actually. I firmly believe that this conflict must and can be resolved according to the international law. Taking into consideration that by its actions Russia has violated the UN Charter, the Helsinki Final Act of the Conference on Security and Cooperation in Europe, as well as other multiple international and bilateral treaties and agreements, the international community shall and can react according to the international law in this case. And the international law states that any kind of intervention by one state in another's internal affairs is unacceptable and should be condemned by the global community. And the question is, again, when will they do it? And will they do it in time? And I think this will determine whether the Georgian scenario will repeat itself in Ukraine or not. And I hope and I pray that it will not.
All right, Professor, thank you so much for your passionate insight tonight.
And turning now to more global news updates, from China opening its annual parliamentary session to the driest month in Singapore in over 140 years. We turn to our Paul Lee at the News Center.
So, Paul, what did we learn from the first day of the National People's Congress in Beijing?
Well, the big focus this year for China is the military and the economy. China opened its annual National People's Congress on Wednesday morning, kicking off a key legislative session with over 3,000 delegates in attendance. Beijing will boost its military defense budget by 12.2% to about $131 billion, which will likely go towards border defenses in light of its expanded air defense zone. Premier Li Keqiang highlighted that China's growth target for 2014 will be kept at 7.5% as it seeks to stabilize the economy. The full session of the Congress will run for a total of 9 days, during which corruption, pollution, and reform issues will be addressed. And over in the United States, President Barack Obama has submitted an annual budget blueprint for the 2015 fiscal year that features a focus on fighting poverty. The $3.9 trillion budget proposal calls for a raise in minimum wages and more spending on infrastructure, while also reducing the budget deficit by over $650 billion over the next decade. Obama said it was all about strengthening the middle class through job creation and economic growth. Obama, however, is expected to face strong resistance from getting the budget passed by the Republican-controlled House of Representatives. And heading over to Southeast Asia, an intense wave of dry heat has been battering many countries in the region over the past few weeks. Singapore's National Environment Agency announced Wednesday that the country is suffering one of its worst dry seasons in history, with February being its driest month since 1869. Experts say the dry spell threatens to raise further food prices and have a negative effect on emerging economies in the region. But relief may be on the way, as the inter-monsoon season is set to begin at the middle of this month and run through early May. That's all the international stories making headlines around the world. I'll see you back here tomorrow night.
The weather took a step back from spring to winter today here in Korea.
For more, let's go over to our Kim Bo-kyung at the Weather Center. Bo-kyung.
Well, we can't say goodbye to winter just yet. About 10 centimeters of snow has piled up in the East Coast regions, although the snow showers have now come to an end. Well, it must feel like winter wonderland over in Gangwon-do province, as cold wave warning has been issued there. Gyeonggi-do province and Seoul are under a dry weather warning, so please make sure to keep yourselves hydrated. Currently, the nation is under the influence of a high-pressure system from the northwest, which is why we're seeing clear skies across the map. Now let's hang in there a bit longer, because we will get back to our seasonal average temperatures over the weekend, and tomorrow is forecast to be a sunny one. Moving on to Thursday's readings, Seoul starts off the day at -4 degrees with a high of 6. Daegu and Gwangju reach 8. As for other regions, Daejeon and Jeju also make it to 8 degrees, and Dokdo tops out at 2. Well, that's all for now, but I'll be back with more updates after midnight.
Welcome to Primetime Sports. I'm Stephen Che. As an athlete, one of the biggest honors you can have is meeting the president. Well, here in Seoul on Wednesday, South Korea's Sochi Olympics athletes got a chance to meet President Park Geun-hye for lunch at the Blue House. President Park heaped praise on the Olympians, calling them true heroes for inspiring the people of Korea. She went on to say that the public was not hungry for medals from Sochi, but rooting for compatriots in lesser-known sports like curling and bobsleigh. Well, the president was in for a treat as well. She was presented with an Olympic torch and a signed bobsleigh helmet by figure skater Kim Yeon-ah and bobsledder Won Yun-jong. And moving on, international football friendlies are kicking off across the globe. But let's get to South Korea's match against Greece coming up in just a few hours. It's an important tune-up for the Korean squad, with coach Hong Myung-bo reiterating that it's the final test before he unveils the official World Cup roster on Thursday. Now action kicks off at the Karaiskaki Stadium in Athens at 2 a.m. Korea time. Meanwhile, with just about 100 days to go, FIFA has given their thumbs up to Brazil's ongoing preparations for the World Cup. Marking the occasion, FIFA President Sepp Blatter said that all problems are under control and that it will be a, quote, exceptional good start for an exceptional competition. However, despite the encouraging comments, Brazil continues to work at a frenetic pace, with some stadiums still standing unfinished. Now on to the Korean Basketball League. In the first of the doubleheader, KT took down Dongbu 80-74. But now let's talk about the game of the night. It's the SK Knights and the Samsung Thunders facing off in Seoul. The Thunder strike fast and take a 9-point lead into the half. Well, the Knights make their push in the third, but can't get it going inside the paint. Lee Kwan-hee drops 17 points on the night, and the Thunders nab the win 73-69. Now it's pro volleyball in the V-League. Last place KEPCO hosted Korean Air in Suwon. Now Korean Air, coming off a loss to Samsung, take flight, beating out the home team for the first two sets. Now KEPCO makes a final push at the end, but Korean Air, on the back of Michael Sanchez's 26 winners, locks it up in straight sets. That's all I have for now, but I'll be back later with more from the world of sports. Now back to you guys.
Thanks, Stephen. And that's a broadcast on this Wednesday night. I'm Yu Ji-hae in Seoul.
And I'm Sean Lim. Thanks for watching. We'll see you soon.